We are entering into the holiest time of the year, the Sacred Triduum. It is in these days that we recall the most significant mysteries of our faith, leading up to our celebration of the Lord's resurrection at Easter. Holy Thursday, the liturgy we celebrate today, is called the Mass of the Lord's Supper. As I start this reflection, I invite you to pause this video and go read the readings for this Mass if you haven't already done so. You can find them at usccb.org. In this Mass, we recall the Last Supper. Many of us probably have an image of the Last Supper displayed in our homes. I'm here in my dining room, which also has an image of the Last Supper. This dining room is also my temporary tribunal office, but I won't show you the mess over here. In our church, there's also an image of the Last Supper on the high altar. If you've never really looked at it, I invite you to take note of it next time you're in the church. Why is this moment so significant? It is, of course, because at the Last Supper that Jesus instituted the gift of the Eucharist. We recall his words at every Mass we celebrate. We recall that moment in which he gave himself to us as true food and true drink in Holy Communion, in which we receive our Lord, body, blood, soul, and divinity. In other words, Jesus gives himself entirely to us, just as in the events that follow, he gives himself entirely for us. The Last Supper and Jesus' gift of self to us is so intimately tied to his death of the cross, which we recall tomorrow on Good Friday. St. Paul, in the second reading, says, "For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the death of the Lord until he comes." This year, our entering into this celebration takes new meaning. When most of us are not able to be physically present at the celebration of the Mass, when we're not able to receive our Lord in Holy Communion, I hope that in this time of separation from the sacraments which nourish us, we will become more aware of the gift that actually is. There have been many throughout history who only had access to Mass periodically, or perhaps not even at all. In fact, this is the reality for some even today. I recall being at a Mass in a very rural village in Mexico when I was in college. The village was in a mountainous area. On Saturday night, there'd been a great deal of rain. It was very muddy. I and the group that I was with had to make our way through the muddy paths to try and make it to Mass. It took us longer to get there than we anticipated, and I began to get anxious that we were not going to make it on time. In fact, when we got to the church, we were in fact late for the start time of Mass. But when I looked into the church, Mass had not yet started. See, the priest didn't live in the village either. He had to travel to get there as well, and the rain had slowed him down. But when it was actually time for that Mass to begin, and to be honest, I don't remember much about the Mass itself that day, except for the joy of the people that were present. Because when Mass started, they all came out once again, and the church was full, and it was full of joy. The people of that village understood the importance of what they were celebrating and were simply greatly grateful for the opportunity that they had to do so. In the Gospel, John recounts for us the washing of the feet. And after Jesus had finished, he asked the apostles, "Do you realize what I have done for you?" The reality is that they probably didn't really understand it fully. He tells them that he's given them an example and that they must wash the feet of one another. But it would take time for that lesson to really sink in. What about us? Do we allow that lesson to sink in? It's an important reminder for us too. The people of that Mexican village understood this in ways that have continued to impress me all these years later. They were generous and loving, but it was rooted in their faith, which is why they made the effort to be present when the Mass was actually being celebrated. We have been gifted in so many ways. Jesus has given us himself. What more could we ask for? And yet we're often dissatisfied. As we recall today what the Lord has done for us and the grace of the Eucharist we celebrate, perhaps we could reflect upon that question of Jesus. Do we realize what he has done for us? And as we recognize what he has done for us, how do we respond? Let us be mindful of our call to serve one another as the Lord has done for us, to serve with the love that God has poured out for us, to serve as he has called us as a people of faith, deeply rooted in faith. And as we long for a return to what is normal, whatever that might be, perhaps we can take stock of what we have and continue to look for ways to serve one another, guided by the light of God's grace and of his love for us, and deeply rooted in an ever-deepening faith.